So let's say you're scrolling, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook Reels even, it doesn't matter. And you land on one of these videos. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of likes, and in the comments there's often a young person that keeps commenting the same thing. We are not mad enough. We should be angrier. Why is nobody doing anything? And I find that I keep stopping on those videos not because they're wrong, but because after the 100th one, a different question started to form for me. Not just the question of why aren't we mad enough, but why do I keep watching videos about being mad enough instead of actually doing something about it? Because here's the thing about my generation, Gen Z. Youth turnout in the last presidential election was just around 42%, and that's the one we're all supposed to show up for. So when you get down to the city council, the school board, the local primaries, the rooms where, the decisions about your schools and your roads and all these things actually get made, our turnout literally collapses. It's often single digits in most places. We as Gen Z know more than any generation before us, and yet we participate almost less than any of them. It feels like we're just mostly tuned out by this point. But the problem is that I know I care, I know my neighbors care, I know we all care. I think we all care so much that it's almost paralyzing. It's interesting to see that we're the most politically aware generation in a long time, in the sense that, for example, in this video, I'm not going to explain to you what Citizens United is, because I feel like you've already seen it, or even if you don't, you recognize that the systems around our country and our world have been built to serve the rich and not us. Thanks to social media, many more of us are actually learning about how our systems have been designed to work against us. So whether or not we have the vocabulary to mention late-stage capitalism or the military-industrial complex or regulatory capture, we all understand fundamentally that we are not the ones being served by the government. But when you actually challenge one of these people, hell, even myself, about what we should actually do about these problems, we don't really have an answer. It turns out that Gen Z actually does show up. For the Black Lives Matter protests as well as the global climate strike, millions and millions of people, including Gen Z, showed up in huge droves. The recent No Kings protests show that we have the appetite to show up for the really big things, and that's actually the problem. When something feels big enough to show up for, our generation has the capacity to move more people than anyone ever has. So then I have to ask myself, is that actually enough? Because while those numbers are genuinely enormous, it doesn't change the fact that the Epstein files are still sealed, or that Citizens United is still law, or that billionaires are still buying elections. The climate is getting worse, so what did 26 million people in the streets actually change? I'm not asking that to be cynical, I am asking that, however, because I think that that's the real question underneath all of this and why you and me feel the way that we do. Because we see what large protest movements do on a constant basis, and yet it feels like the people in power just absorb it and act like nothing happened. So what are we supposed to do instead? If that's what all the big revolutionary stuff looks like, it's no wonder why, again, my generation still feels helpless to do anything about it. And I know I've already gone on for a bit about how hopeless Gen Z is, I get that. But here's what I am actually coming back to. Because if large protests and large movements in general haven't moved the needle on all these issues like corrupt politicians and billionaire greed, it might be because we've been trying to push on a door that doesn't open from that side. What I've come to realize is that our generation is not showing up for the battles that actually matter. And I found that the people showing up to these battles instead of us in my generation, they're not the people who are like me watching everything online. They're the people who are showing up to the rooms that I've never even bothered going to. School board elections in this country routinely run at just 5 to 10% turnout. I mean, that's honestly pathetic. In Delaware in 2023, not a single board district cracked 10% at all, and most came in under just 5. In 2023, 53% of all school board seats in America were completely uncontested. Nobody ran for them. Like, what? Because the thing about an empty room is that it is a victory for whoever bothers to show up. In 2022, Moms for Liberty, an organization that was just 1 year old at the time, got 40% of their endorsed school board candidates elected. It's not like America had a great awakening about teaching the 10 commandments to first graders or anything. It's because they were the only people in the building at that time. And I think this reframes something that we complain about constantly, which is that we are not fighting the battles that actually decide what the next generation of kids will read in a classroom. While you might find it crazy and ironic to see that these organizations are actively censoring media like Fahrenheit 451, it's even more astounding that no one is showing up in these rooms to say, hey, that's a stupid idea. And as such, we are quietly losing the fight over what millions of children will be taught. Political scientists split the feeling of being a citizen into two things: internal efficacy, which is whether you believe you understand the system, and external efficacy, which is whether you believe the system will actually respond to you if you engage with it. And we can very clearly see how social media gave Gen Z, and many people for that matter, enormous internal efficacy. We understand the machine that's working against us very deeply, but every single video explaining why the system is rigged, every thread about why billionaires own Congress, every clip about why your vote doesn't matter after it all, however true, has been quietly demolishing our external efficacy. A 2024 Harvard poll found that 41% of young Americans don't believe their vote will make a real difference, and that number went up between 2020 and 2024. A Berkeley study this same year just flatly described young voters as fatalistic about broken politics. So here's what I see in my read on all this. We are not apathetic, because apathy is not caring. I argue we are the complete opposite of that, which is to say that all this engagement online shows that we care so enormously, and yet we're being shown every single day, 1,000 times a day, that the only action proportional to the scale of all of these ginormous problems is a revolution. So the marches and the protests feel worth it because the march matches the size of the problem in our heads, but the Tuesday night school board meeting feels insultingly small because it feels like bringing a bucket to a flood. But the thing about a flood is that it's not going to wait for you to find a bigger bucket. And while we were deciding whether the bucket was too small to even bother with, someone else picked it up and started working. Because every time in American history that something genuinely corrupt and entrenched lost, it was because people built power from the ground up slowly, in rooms that nobody was watching, until they had enough of it for the people at the top to actually be afraid. The local governance, like school boards for example, is how the big stuff eventually becomes possible. And if you still feel disillusioned to believe that our generation doesn't have what it takes to make change like that happen again, then let me tell you the story of David Morales, to show you the power of these small unglamorous actions turning into real change in 2026. David Morales grew up in Soledad, California, a small farm town, raised by a single immigrant mother working multiple minimum wage jobs to keep him and his sister fed. While he was canvassing his neighborhood just as a normal person, knocking on doors for his organization, he kept hearing the same thing from people who had been living there for more than a decade. "You're the first person who has ever come here and talked to me about these issues." The sitting state representative that these voters put in office was a Democrat who had held the district seat comfortably for years, and he had apparently never shown up. David Morales, though, looked at his district and made a different decision. At 21, with no party machine behind him, no corporate PAC money, no institutional support, he announced that he was running to be the state representative for District 7. And the crazy thing too is that in a political era where candidates like Jamal Bowman and more recently Thomas Massie lost due to record-breaking levels of money in politics, David only needed $23,000. He canvassed through the cold months while no one was doing it, talking to his neighbor about real problems that they shared and felt. Then COVID hit, and instead of just stopping, he pivoted to phone banking and he connected with neighbors with free food delivery. He wrote letters by hand and he distributed homemade masks he helped sew. He won his primary with an astounding 49% in a three-way race, beating an incumbent who had lived in that district for over 6 years. He passed Cover All Kids, which guarantees healthcare to every low-income child in Rhode Island regardless of immigration status, mind you, as well. Before this, there were roughly 3,000 children in that state with no coverage at all, most of them just being under 10 years old, that are all now officially covered. He made it so that the insulin cap is now at just $40 a month, because before that cap, diabetics in Rhode Island were rationing insulin the way people ration insulin in this country, which is to say very dangerously, because they could not afford to keep paying for the full proper dose. And the fact that this wasn't done before is crazy because lives are at stake. People will die if they don't have their proper dose of a medicine that is so ridiculously cheap everywhere else. One last thing that I'll highlight about David's work is that he pushed forward the winter utility shutoff moratorium. This means, in practice, that a family in Providence cannot have their heat turned off in the coldest months because they fell behind on a bill. None of these people who benefited from these bills ever held the press conference. None of them probably never even knew who David Morales was when they felt the difference. And that's exactly the point. David Morales was that person because he grew up in Soledad, California, watching his mother work multiple minimum wage jobs, and he understood at a level that is not abstract what it means for a family to have the heat stay on. He never cared to be the face of the movement. He was completely content with being the person in the back making whoever was in the front possible. And as you can see throughout his story, even when he did get elected, nothing about his work actually changed. He kept doing what he had always done until it led him to these very moments. For a long time, I felt exactly what a lot of you have probably felt. Disillusioned. I would scroll and I would see 1,000 people pointing at everything that was wrong, and I never once saw anyone give me a real reason to believe why any of this could even ever change. And at some point, I just got tired of it. I wasn't tired of specifically caring, I was just tired of lying flat as many of my generation has now started doing. I was tired of being online and absorbing the enormous scale of every problem and just doing nothing about it, and somehow calling that being informed. Because I don't want us to be the generation that knew everything and did nothing. I really don't, and I am ambitious enough to maybe naively believe that this channel could one day be a big enough movement to rally behind young people and old people alike to start paying attention to local politics and finally build the country that we keep saying that we want. The goal of this channel isn't even strictly about politics either. My purpose is to spread a message about getting out there and acting in your life with intention instead of just scrolling it all away and pretending like these issues are just too far out of our control. So here's what I'm actually going to ask you to do. To most of you watching, I ask that you do something very small. Please pay attention to your local politics. That's it. At least start looking at the school board, the city council, or the state house race that nobody actually covers online. Learn at least one name and see what you can learn about their platform and why you support them or don't, and start having these conversations with the people in your life. Even if 1% of you watching this video just paid a little more attention to the local politics around you, the awareness starts to become normal in our generation. And if it becomes the thing that our whole generation and all people in general start doing, that alone changes the math of our entire politics. And for the small minority of you watching, for those of you that felt very inspired by David's story to the point that you felt like you could do something like that yourself, I wanted to share with you a website called runforsomething.net. Run for Something exists for exactly one purpose: to help young people with no connections and no money figure out how to run for local office. They have helped elect over 1,600 young people already. With all that being said, let me leave you with what I actually see when I let myself be hopeful, which I'm still learning how to do every day. I see a country, not that far away, where the people in office actually look like the people that they represent. Because ordinary people ran and ordinary people voted in the races that nobody used to care about. I see a Congress full of people who got there the same way that David Morales did, by knocking on doors and helping their community, so that when a bill to finally overturn Citizens United reaches the floor, there are enough of them that don't flinch when the time comes because they don't owe anyone anything. I see corporate money losing, not because we outspent it, but because that's not the point. The point is that we beat corporate greed because we outshowed up. And it all starts with paying attention. If this video gave you even a little bit of that hope, the kind of actionable hope that actually points you somewhere, then subscribe, because that's how this channel keeps going and growing into whatever it's capable of becoming. And share this video with someone, specifically someone you know who feels as paralyzed as you do probably, because I want to share this message to everyone in this world about the power of change instead of just selling you more despair and acting like there's just no solution about it either. I want you, after all this, to come back to this video and tell me what you did. Leave a comment and tell me the name that you learned, or the organization you signed up for, or the office you're even thinking about running for. I want to know, because the only way I will ever find out if any of this was real, whether it was just a movement or just a video I made, is if you keep coming back and you tell me if you showed up. I'll see you in the next one.